Pastor Kyle here. Welcome to my kitchen. It's a chilly evening. If you did not have a chance to see our videos from earlier in the year, we released about 18 5-minute or so devotionals to just kind of jumpstart your spiritual life, no matter what time of the year it is. We hope you'll take advantage of those and watch them. Those are done, and I've been thinking, rather than doing daily 5-minute videos, maybe weekly videos that are slightly longer, about 15 minutes. So rather than a cup of coffee, you might want to get a sandwich and a snack during these. On Sundays, during a church service, we're trying to help people, encourage them, give them hope. It's very practical, but sometimes we don't have a chance to maybe pull the curtain back a little bit and talk about why we do certain things that we do, how we view the world and how we view the Bible through certain things. And I thought that might be interesting for you. And so these videos are aiming to kind of talk about the intersection between theology and ministry philosophy and how church is done the way it is, or how maybe a Christian can respond. I joked about calling it theology caffeinated, because normally I'm drinking coffee when I'm doing theology. It's too late in the evening for coffee now, but I'm not getting paid or money for this. It's just I really believe it. If I was drinking coffee, my camera is like a mirror, so it's backwards, but it says Max Cremas Coffee. It's about 2 miles up the road from the church on the left on Pricetown Road. Best kept secret in coffee in Berks County. Roast their own beans, single origin coffees. Highly recommend it. Okay, I want to talk today about the intersection of Christianity and culture. We live in a culture where you might have heard recently the Grammys took place, and Christian music artist Natalie Grant walked out early because of the mass same-sex wedding, and that's a culture issue. This Sunday, we're going to be having the Super Bowl, and our church is going to be hosting kind of a preaching competition playoff connected with a cultural event, the Super Bowl. Sometimes you might hear a song on the radio, and it's not a Christian song, but it stirs your heart spiritually. How does that connect? How do Christians and culture go together? In 1951, I believe it was, H. Richard Niebuhr wrote a book called Christ and Culture. It's considered a classic. And in that book, he talks about 5 ways that Christianity and culture have typically been seen. Now, for the sake of time and simplicity, I'm just going to talk about 2 of them. One way that Christianity has intersected with culture in the past is what he calls Christ against culture. And this really takes the view that Christ is the judge. And indeed, God is the judge. He's the just judge. He's the righteous judge. And this would look at scriptures that say things like, love not the world or the things of the world. Scriptures that would say things like, come out from among them and be separate. And so it would see Christ as the judge of culture, which is a representation of our collective fallenness, and we would want to separate or resist culture. An extreme example of this would be the Amish, the Old Order Amish. They might be surrounded by a metropolitan area, but they themselves are living as if it's 300 years ago. They resist culture. A less extreme example of this would be the kind of Christianity that my grandma was raised in. She was raised in a very strict, we would say legalistic brand of Christianity, in which culture was resisted. So you didn't go to movies, you didn't go to theater, you didn't dance even if it was with your spouse. Women had all kinds of dress codes. You didn't have hairstyles, you let your hair grow long and you put it in a bun, and you wore long skirts down to your ankles, and you didn't wear makeup or jewelry, and all this was resisting culture. But with respect to my grandma and maybe Christians who came from that background, they didn't always reflect on why they had the view that they did, or if it was the only view biblically or even the right view. There's a second view that Niebuhr would talk about, which doesn't necessarily focus as much on Christ as the judge, but would focus on Christ as the redeemer. We do believe that Christ redeems. He is the judge, yes, but he wants to redeem. And so Jesus can transform a person, and Jesus can not only transform individual people, but collective people, and he can transform that way culture. So let me give you some examples, some ancient examples, and then I'll even carry the debate back further, and then I'll give you some contemporary examples as well. Now here's the key. No matter where you fall on this, it's okay. There's probably people in Spring Valley, a church our size, who will fall on different sides of this issue, and that's all right. This isn't kind of heaven and hell, God, not God kind of thing. good Christians can have different views, but what I hope this video helps is for you to understand why you have the view that you have, and even if you have a disagreement with someone, at least you'll be able to respect their view, hopefully, and understand where they're coming from better. The other view that Niebuhr then would talk about is Christ the Redeemer, who can transform culture. An example of this would be St. Patrick, who St. Patrick's Day commemorates. If you're interested in his story, you can read How the Irish Saved Civilization by Thomas Cahill. Fantastic book. But anyway, St. Patrick was a missionary to Ireland, which was a pagan island. They had pagan holidays that they worshiped their gods, and they had temples in which they would worship their gods. Now, had St. Patrick taken Christ against culture, he would have said, abandon your days and abandon your temples and do it my way, the Catholic way. But he didn't. St. Patrick actually had the view of Christ, the transformer of culture. And so he said, okay, if this day is a day that's special to you, this day is a day that you're used to celebrating a religious festival, we'll still have a religious festival on that exact same day. The only difference, instead of worshiping and commemorating your pagan idols on that day, we'll commemorate and worship God and Christ and the biblical stories. And so he kind of baptized the pagan holidays and allowed them to worship or celebrate or commemorate on days that they were used to, but took that very same day, and now they were worshiping the true God instead of their pagan gods. In a similar way, Patrick and some of his missionaries would allow them to keep their temples. Now, they would always make sure to smash and demolish all of the idols if there were any graven images, but they said, look, if this is a place that is meaningful for you, if this is a building that's meaningful for you, that you come and worship, you'll still come and worship in the exact same place and in the exact same building, only now, instead of worshiping your pagan gods, the building itself that used to be a vehicle for idolatry will become a vehicle for true worship, and you can worship Jesus in what used to be a pagan temple, now rechristened as a church. Now, some of you might struggle with that, but personally, I think it's a really fascinating and powerful way that a Christian missionary was able to salvage culture and baptize it. And if you study, really Ireland had one of the most significant revivals in all of history by Patrick taking this view. Of course, this goes way back before H. Richard Niebuhr wrote his book. This goes way back before St. Patrick. In the 3rd century, Christianity was really hubbed in Africa. So for all my African brothers and sisters, that was the place. And there were 2 significant Christian figures in Africa. The first was Clement of Alexandria in what would be present-day Egypt. And the second would be Tertullian. And I believe he was in present-day Tunisia and Carthage. Now, the philosophical thought of the day was kind of Greek philosophy. Educated people drew from Aristotle and Plato and Socrates, and many cultured non-Christian people looked down on Christianity as being ignorant or kind of backwoods and not knowing the truth. Clement of Alexandria intentionally took pagan Greek philosophy, so Aristotle, Plato, and Socrates, and would filter it through the Bible and would interpret Greek philosophy through the Bible to show that Christians were just as intelligent, cultured as the Greeks, and in fact had the true philosophy. Clement's kind of saying was, all truth is God's truth. What he was saying was, so Aristotle and Plato and all that Greek thought might not be saving truth, but there's still morals, there's still wisdom, and we can affirm that in Christ. All truth is God's truth, and any errors can be corrected. And in that way, he was able to show that Christianity was the true philosophy. Tertullian was different. Tertullian understood that Greek philosophy was influential. Greek philosophy, of course, coming from Athens, Greece, Christianity coming from Jerusalem. Tertullian's saying was not, all truth is God's truth. He might have agreed with that, but Tertullian would have probably been pessimistic. All truth might be God's truth, but are humans that are fallen, even Christian humans, smart enough to determine what is the truth from what is the error? Might we not get confused once we start interacting with the culture? And so instead, Tertullian said, what does what does Athens have to do with Jerusalem? That was Tertullian saying. What does Athens have to do with Jerusalem? What does this pagan thought have anything to do with Christianity? They're different. Let the Greeks be the Greeks, let the pagans be the pagans, let the philosophers do philosophy. We're Christians, and we focus on Jesus. Now, that sounds compelling, but let me tell you why I don't totally buy it. If you study Tertullian's thought, Tertullian is actually clearly influenced by a Greek philosophical trend called Stoicism. He might not be open about it and he might not be accepting it, but it's clear that in the background of Tertullian's framework is Stoic thought. So while he's saying don't focus at all on this philosophy coming from Athens, he's being influenced unconsciously by philosophy coming from Athens. So while the talk sounds great, it just doesn't really add up. And here's why, I think. I believe that culture, whether it's the kind of the worldview that we live in, the philosophical framework that we live in, the rhythms of life that we live in, it's not perfect, but we, even Christians, are to culture what a fish is to water. It's unescapable. We can't escape it. Let me give you an example. So Tertullian is rejecting culture seemingly and yet influenced by it. Think about the Amish. They would reject 21st and 20th century culture, but they're still influenced by culture. They've embraced and held to 17th century culture. But think about this. It's the 17th century still isn't biblical. I mean, it's not what the apostles lived in. And if you believe that all seasons are equally sinful, we believe in total depravity, there was never a utopia, then there's no guarantee that just living in the 17th century will make you any holier than if you live in the 21st century. See, everybody has a culture, not derived from the Bible. Oh, the Bible should inform it, the Bible should influence it, and yes, the Bible should transform it, but we all start somewhere. You can't escape it. So, as we look at this, there's one view that you can have Christ against culture or Christ as the transformer of culture. Really, though, and if I go back to H. Richard Niebuhr's book, I would say you can't affirm and transform everything. There are certain parts of culture that need to be resisted. As Christians, we can't affirm everything. We can't transform everything. Things like abortion and euthanasia, the redefinition of marriage and the family, we have to, in love, resist that. Love the people, but resist that. That can't be transformed. That must be resisted. But there are other areas of culture that I believe can be interacted with and transformed. And so, a couple examples. Where do we get the idea of music being either Christian or secular? I get the idea. There's Christian artists and secular artists, but if something speaks to your heart, can't that be used for God? So, for instance, I don't think we're going to do this in church, but as of this recording, one of the most popular songs in America is Avicii's Hey Brother. He's not a Christian artist. But when I first heard Hey Brother, I mean, the lyrics, if the sky's falling down on you, there's nothing I wouldn't do. That's a Christian message. That's the kind of love that Christian brothers and sisters should have, and that could easily be done in church to maybe a dance. You could use culture for godly aims. This Sunday, of course, we're going to be having the Super Bowl of preaching. We're going to be using a cultural event for godly aims. Or, for some of you who live in the greater Reading area and really have a heart for Reading and the condition of Reading, I'm going to put a link to a church in Tampa, Florida, Crossover Church. If Max Kremes is the best kept secret in coffee, Crossover Church is the best kept secret in churches. I'm surprised more people haven't heard about it. They're in Tampa, and they found a way to leverage hip-hop culture. Not for their youth group, but for the main church themselves. It amazes me that no church in the city of Reading has found a way to do this. Eventually, somebody's going to. People who aren't church people in Reading love hip-hop culture. That's where they're from, and we might have more of a Latin flair because of our demographics than Crossover would. But I'm going to put the link, and I want you to watch it. And that's an inspiration for vision. So where do you fall? Christ as the redeemer of culture, and we transform it. Christ as the judge of culture, and we resist it. Or maybe somewhere in the middle. It's kind of where I would fall. Christ and culture in paradox. There are things that we can affirm and things that we got to resist. Well, I hope this is informative, and I'll be back next week to talk about legalism and how legalists are actually misreading the Bible. Have a good day.